She'd been sewing military uniforms for 40 years. Every medal, every ribbon, every patch, she knew what they meant. But when the 4-star general walked into her tiny tailor shop and she counted the 187 medals on his chest, her hands froze. She looked up at his face, really looked, and whispered, "You—" Then the strongest woman in town started crying. The bell above the door chimed at exactly 800 hours. Maggie. Chen looked up from the marine dress blue uniform she was hemming, the third one this week. The shop was small, maybe 400 square feet, wedged between a dry cleaner and a Korean restaurant in a strip mall 2 miles from Quantico Marine Corps Base. She'd been here for 40 years. 40 years of hems and buttons and patches. 40 years of measuring inseams and marking chalk lines. 40 years of being invisible. At 68 years old, Maggie was small, 5'2", and maybe 110 pounds soaking wet. Her black hair, now heavily streaked with silver, was always pulled back in a tight bun. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck and dressed in simple, practical clothes. Black pants, white blouse, comfortable shoes. Her hands were her tools. Calloused from decades of needlework, strong despite arthritis, precise despite age. The morning customer was a young Marine Lance Corporal, maybe 22, picking up his dress blues for his sister's wedding. "Morning, ma'am. I'm here for the Murphy pickup. Uniform alteration." "Murphy? Yes." Maggie moved to the rack, her fingers finding the right uniform without looking. She'd organized this rack the same way for 40 years. She could find things in her sleep. "Try it on. The fitting room is there." While he changed, she returned to her work table surrounded by mountains of military uniforms in various states of repair. Dress blues, service alphas, combat utilities, flight suits, she'd sewn them all. The walls of her shop were covered with photos. Decades of Marines in their dress uniforms, soldiers in their Class A's, sailors in their whites. Thousands of service members had walked through that door. She'd dressed them for promotions, for awards ceremonies, for retirements, for funerals. None of them knew who she really was. The Lance Corporal emerged, checking himself in the 3-way mirror. "Perfect, ma'am. How much do I owe you?" $20. "That's it? The shop on base charges $40 for this kind of work." Maggie smiled, a small, tired smile. "I don't do this for the money, son. I do it because you deserve to look sharp when you wear that uniform." He paid, thanked her, and left. The bell chimed again. Maggie was alone. She looked at the photo on her work table. Faded, creased, 40 years old. It showed a much younger version of herself in a different kind of uniform. Olive drab. Specialist rank, standing in front of a canvas tent in a jungle clearing, holding an M16 rifle. Vietnam, 1968. Back when she was Specialist Margaret Chen, 7th Field Hospital, Pleiku, she'd been 28 years old. A lifetime ago. The bell chimed again. She put the photo back in the drawer, face down. That part of her life was over. Had been for decades. If this story of hidden service and unexpected recognition already has your heart racing, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. What happens when this seamstress reveals her past will remind you that the most important heroes are often the ones we never see. Your support helps me bring you more incredible stories of unsung warriors. Now let's go to that small Virginia tailor shop where a routine alteration was about to uncover a 40-year secret. The bell chimed at 11:15 hours. Maggie was in the back, steaming a set of navy whites when she heard it. "Be right there," she called, setting down the iron. She walked to the front and stopped. The man standing in her shop was different from her usual customers. Older, maybe 70, taller, 6'2" at least, and wearing a uniform that made her breath catch. Army service uniform. Full dress. 4 stars on each shoulder. A general. An actual 4-star general in her tiny tailor shop. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gravelly with age and authority. "I apologize for not calling ahead. I'm General Richard Morrison. I'm speaking at the National Museum of the Marine Corps tomorrow, and I need my uniform pressed and a few ribbons repositioned. The shop on base is backed up and someone recommended you. Are you available?" Maggie found her voice. "Yes, sir." "Of course, let me get my tools." Her hands were shaking slightly as she gathered her tape measure, pincushion, and marking chalk. A 4-star general. In 40 years, she'd never had anyone above colonel. Generals had people who did this for them. Generals didn't walk into strip mall tailor shops. "If you could take off the jacket, sir, I'll assess what needs to be done." Morrison removed his jacket carefully and handed it to her. It was heavy. The weight of all those medals, all those ribbons, all that history. Maggie laid it on her work table and began her assessment. This was her ritual. The same for every uniform. Check the shoulders. Check the seams. Check the buttons. Check the... She stopped. Her eyes had reached the left breast of the jacket, where the ribbons and medals were displayed. Years of experience let her read them like a book. Top row, Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross. Silver Star with oak leaf cluster. The second row, the third, the fourth. She began counting without meaning to. It was automatic. 40 years of sewing these exact medals in these exact positions on thousands of uniforms had trained her brain to catalog them instantly. 5th row. 6th. Purple Heart with 3 oak leaf clusters. Bronze Star with V device. 7th row. Her counting slowed. Her hands went still. 8th row. 9th. Air Medal. Army Commendation Medal with Valor device. She recognized the pattern now. The specific combination. The order. There was only one. "Sir," she said, her voice suddenly hoarse, How many total medals and ribbons do you have on this jacket?" Morrison looked surprised by the question. "I'm not sure off the top of my head. Maybe 180? 190. I stopped counting years ago." "Why do you ask?" Maggie's hands were trembling now as she continued her count. 10th row, 11th. Her brain was doing math it hadn't done in 40 years, pulling up information from a part of her memory she'd locked away. Campaign ribbons, Vietnam Service Medal, National Defense Service Medal. Her voice was a whisper. 187. "I'm sorry? You have 187 medals and ribbons on this jacket." She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the uniform, her fingers hovering over one specific medal. Including this one. Her finger pointed to a small medal in the 3rd row. Octagonal. Bronze. With a small V. Device. The Army Commendation Medal for Valor, dated 1968. "Sir," she said, and her voice was shaking now. "In July of 1968, you were a captain with the 1st Cavalry Division. You were part of a medical evacuation under fire at Landing Zone Stinson, near Pleiku. A Chinook helicopter carrying wounded soldiers was shot down. You went back into enemy fire 3 times to pull out survivors. You carried 7 wounded men to safety yourself." Morrison had gone very still. How do you know that?" Maggie looked up at him. Really looked. And through the 40 years of aging, through the white hair and the weathered face and the 4 stars, she saw him. Younger. Darker hair. Covered in blood and mud. Carrying a wounded soldier over his shoulder while bullets tore through the air around them. And she saw herself. Younger. Black hair flying loose from her bun. Specialist Chen, running toward the helicopter wreckage with a medic bag, screaming for morphine, because, she said, and tears were running down her face now, surprising her. "I was the field medic who treated those 7 men. I was the one who radioed for the second evacuation bird. I was there. The shop went silent except for the hum of the refrigerated display case and the distant sound of traffic outside. Morrison stared at her. Specialist Chen? I haven't used that name in 40 years, she whispered. I've been Maggie Murphy since 1985. Took my husband's name when we got married. But yes, sir, I was Specialist Margaret Chen, 7th Field Hospital. My God! Morrison's voice was rough. He pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, like his legs had stopped working. My God, I looked for you. After the war, I wanted to thank you. They told me you'd left the army, that you'd married and disappeared. I never forgot you. Maggie sank into her own chair, the uniform still in her hands. I got out in 1972, came home. Tried to forget. Got married, had a daughter, lost my husband to cancer in 95, and I sewed. It was the only thing I could do that kept me connected to the military without having to remember too much. You saved my life that day, Morrison said. Twice. Once when you pulled shrapnel out of my shoulder while we were still under fire. And again when you radioed in our position. If that helicopter had been 10 minutes later, we all would have died. You saved those men first, Maggie said. 7 wounded soldiers. You could have left them. You could have saved yourself, but you didn't. They sat in silence for a long moment. 2 old warriors, decades and ranks apart, connected by one day in hell 40 years ago. Finally, Morrison spoke. How many uniforms have you sewn? In 40 years? Maggie looked around her shop, at the photos on the walls, at the racks of uniforms waiting to be altered, at the countless ribbons and medals she'd stitched onto countless chests. I don't know. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Every Marine getting promoted at Quantico. Every soldier transferring through Fort Belvoir. Every sailor reporting to the Pentagon. I've sewn for generals and privates and everyone in between. And none of them knew. None of them needed to know, Maggie said quietly. I did my service. I came home. She gestured at the shop. This is how I keep serving. Every uniform I press, every ribbon I sew, every hem I fix, I'm taking care of you all. The way I took care of those wounded boys in Pleiku. The way I took care of you. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up, slowly, and came to attention, and he saluted her. Sir, you don't have to. Specialist Chen, he said formally, holding the salute. On behalf of every service member you saved in Vietnam, and every service member you've taken care of in this shop for the past 40 years, thank you for your service. Maggie stood up, her body remembering the position even after 40 years. She returned the salute, tears streaming down her face. When they dropped their hands, Morrison smiled. Can I ask you something? Of course, sir. Why don't you tell people? Why don't you display your own medals? You earned a Bronze Star, for God's sake. The Army Commendation Medal with Valor device. 2 Purple Hearts. But there's nothing on these walls about your service. Maggie looked at the photos covering her walls. Thousands of young faces in dress uniforms. Because this isn't about me, sir. It never was. I don't need people to know what I did. I need them to be proud of their uniforms. To feel worthy of wearing them. That's my mission now. It has been for 40 years. You're still serving. We all are, sir. In different ways, Morrison nodded slowly. I'm speaking tomorrow at the Marine Corps Museum. It's a ceremony honoring Vietnam veterans, specifically medical personnel who served under fire. Would you consider attending? As my guest? Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I don't. There's an award component, Morrison continued. The Department of Defense has been tracking down Vietnam-era medical personnel who were never properly recognized for their service. Your name came up. Multiple citations. Actions under fire. You're supposed to be honored tomorrow. But they can't find you. All they have is Specialist Margaret Chen, last known address from 1972. Maggie's breath caught. I had no idea. Come tomorrow. Let them honor you. Let your brothers and sisters in arms see you. Let them know you're still here. Maggie hadn't owned a proper dress in years. She spent the evening altering one of her daughter's old outfits to fit herself. Navy blue. Simple. Dignified. She stood in the back of the auditorium at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, trying to make herself small, trying to be invisible the way she'd been invisible for 40 years. The room was packed. 300 people at least. Vietnam veterans in their 70s and 80s. Active duty service members. Families. Press. General Morrison was at the podium, speaking about battlefield medicine, about the medics and corpsmen who'd saved thousands of lives under impossible conditions. Today, he said, we're honoring 12 medical personnel who served in Vietnam with distinction. They are the reason many of us came home, the reason many of us stand here today. One by one, names were called. Veterans walked to the stage to receive certificates, medals, applause. Some used canes. Some were in wheelchairs. All were crying. And finally, Morrison said, his voice carrying across the auditorium, Specialist Margaret Chen, 7th Field Hospital, Pleiku, Bronze Star for Valor. Army Commendation Medal with V device. 2 Purple Hearts. 387 documented medical evacuations under fire. Credited with saving approximately 170 lives during her 18 months of service. The room erupted in applause. Maggie stood frozen in the back. 70 lives. She'd never known the number. She'd treated wounded soldiers, sent them to the rear, and never heard if they made it. 170 lives. Specialist Chen, Morrison said, scanning the crowd. Where are you? A Marine veteran near Maggie turned and saw her standing there, tears streaming down her face, small and alone in her navy blue dress. That's her, he said loudly. Specialist Chen is here. Heads turned. A path opened. Maggie wanted to run, wanted to hide. Wanted to go back to her shop where she could be invisible, where she could serve without being seen. But Morrison was looking directly at her now, and his expression said, "You've been invisible long enough." She walked forward. The crowd stood as she passed, not because she was a general or hero or someone important, but because she was one of them, a veteran, a warrior. Someone who'd bled for her country and then come home and kept serving in silence. She climbed the steps. To the stage. They felt like climbing a mountain. And stood beside Morrison. He handed her the certificate and the medals. New ones. Shiny. To replace the ones she'd put in a drawer 40 years ago. Specialist Chen, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, I was one of those 170 lives. July 14th, 1968, Landing Zone Stinson. You pulled shrapnel out of my shoulder while rounds were still coming in. You radioed for evacuation. You saved me and 6 other men that day. The room was silent. For 40 years, Morrison continued, you've been sewing our uniforms, taking care of us. Serving in the only way you knew how. But we need you to know something. He turned to face the crowd. How many of you have had your uniforms tailored at Murphy's Alterations in Quantico? Hands went up across the auditorium. 20 hands, 30, 50, more than half the room. She's been taking care of all of us, Morrison said, for decades, never asking for recognition. Never asking for thanks, just serving. The way she did in Vietnam, the way she's done her entire life. He turned back to her. You don't have to be invisible anymore, Specialist Chen. We see you, and were grateful. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. The bell above the door chimed at 800 hours. Maggie looked up from the marine dress blue uniform she was hemming. An older man stood in the doorway. Veteran, she could tell by the way he stood, by the ball cap with the unit insignia. "Morning, sir. What can I help you with?" He stepped inside slowly, emotional. "Ma'am, I saw your picture in the paper. The ceremony at the Marine Corps Museum. They said you were Specialist Chen, 7th Field Hospital." "I was, yes. I was at Landing Zone Stinson. July 1968. I was one of the men on that Chinook that went down. I was 19 years old. I had shrapnel in my leg and I was bleeding out. A small Asian woman, you, gave me morphine and tied a tourniquet and told me I was going to be fine. I've been looking for you for 40 years. Maggie set down her needle. "What's your name, son?" "James Rodriguez. Staff Sergeant, retired. I'm 66 years old now. I have 3 kids and 7 grandchildren. Because you saved my life. I was just doing my job." "No, ma'am." He stepped closer. "You were doing more than your job. You were running toward fire when everyone else was running away. You were risking your life to save ours. That's not a job. That's heroism." The bell chimed again. Another veteran entered, then another, and another. By noon, there were 20 people in her tiny shop, all Vietnam veterans, all medically evacuated from combat zones, all treated by small, fierce female medics who'd pulled them back from death, all looking for Specialist Chen. They shared stories, showed scars, cried, laughed, remembered. And Maggie realized something. She'd thought she was invisible because she'd wanted to be invisible, because the war had been too much to carry and hiding was easier than remembering. But she hadn't been invisible. She'd been seen every day by every service member who walked through her door wearing the uniform she'd pressed, the ribbons she'd sewn, the pride she'd helped them display. She'd just been serving in a different way. The bell above the door chimed. A young Marine Lance Corporal entered, nervous, holding his dress blues. "Ma'am, I'm deploying next month. First time. I need my uniform perfect for the going away ceremony. My mom, she's pretty scared, but I told her I'd be okay." Maggie took the uniform, her practiced hands already assessing what needed to be done. "You will be okay, son. You'll do your job. You'll take care of your brothers and sisters. And when things get hard, and they will get hard, you'll remember why you're there." "Yes, ma'am." She started pinning the hem. "And son, when you get back, and you will get back, if you ever need anything, you come see me. It doesn't have to be about a uniform. Could be you just need to talk, to remember, to process. You come here. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you, ma'am." After he left, Maggie looked around her shop, at the walls now covered not just with photos of young service members in their dress uniforms, but also with new photos. Her receiving the Bronze Star from General Morrison. Her surrounded by the veterans who'd found her. Her standing with Morrison at Landing Zone Stinson during a return trip to Vietnam. Both of them old. Both of them crying. Both of them survivors. And in the center of her work table, no longer face down in a drawer, that faded photo from 1968. Specialist Margaret Chen, 7th Field Hospital, Pleiku. Young and fierce and holding an M16. The woman she'd been before she became invisible. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was exactly where she'd always been, taking care of her troops. One stitch at a time. One uniform at a time. One life at a time. For 40 years, she'd been the seamstress of heroes. Now, everyone knew she'd been a hero all along.